Obviously organic search that's declining. Well, how do we fix this or what do we do? So when you get that sort of question, what do you tell brands or franchisors around it?
One of the biggest things obviously is a website. I started to realize there is a very large percentage of, and specifically the form leads are just consistently going down. So when I started doing a deeper research, it really clicked when I realized, there's this thing that we call zero click behavior. And since the influx of AI, specifically ChatGPT or now Gemini, and I'm sure Claude, people are no longer utilizing websites to research.
Do you want to just explain to maybe franchisors and franchisees listening about GEO and AEO?
I ruffled a lot of feathers a few years ago when I started saying it was complete BS that agencies were selling SEO as packages to franchisees. The truth is there is nothing a franchisee can do to help their SEO but to get more reviews.
Yep.
Sure, maybe that could be automated. But if you're telling me you're selling me a SEO package for $4.99 a month and it's going to come with a couple blogs or keywords, it's just BS. That is stuff that the home office should be handling because it's the URL, right? For someone to give your business a yes, and that doesn't mean here's my money. It means first yes, clicking on the link or giving you a call. They need between 12 and 15 impressions.
So welcome back to the Franchise Marketer podcast, and I've got a really special guest today from the USA, so we appreciate you coming so late over there. And Maddie's been a franchisee, a franchisor, and a CMO, and now you're the co-founder of Catalyst, a marketing strategy advisory firm, which is built to help emerging and mid-sized franchise brands align marketing, sales, and operations. And I had a look through a slide deck that you did, and I thought it was really, really good and really useful information, not just for people in the US, but for in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and a lot of other places regarding franchise marketing and where it's going, because there's been a lot of changes, as you would know. And I think people are still really struggling to get their heads around it. I think a lot of franchisors in Australia anyway are really behind in this sort of area, and what worked 5 to 6 years ago just isn't working anymore or to the same extent. And a lot of franchisors over here I know are getting a little bit frustrated with it, but there's a lot of things moving really, really quickly. So I thought we'd grab you on just to ask you a whole bunch of questions about the pain points presentation that you put together, because I thought it was really, really well done. And the information in there is really relevant to a lot of franchisors. So do you want to first off with a bit of an introduction, Maddie, about you've been involved in a lot of things. I had a look at your LinkedIn before and I said, give me an intro for it. It's a lot longer than what I said before, but you've done a lot of things as well. So just give it an intro about where you are now and what you've done in franchising.
Yeah, long story short, many years ago, I started out at a brand that was at the time just Made Pro, so home cleaning. Worked there for about a decade. At the end of my tenure, we had built 11 brands, some from the ground up, some acquired from international, national, the whole bit, and eventually sold it off to private equity. During my time there, I actually met my husband, who was one of the franchisees at Made Pro. So him and I, we have 3 beautiful children now, and we also are the franchisees of still Made Pro, 2 other brands with Threshold, and then 2 brands, one a non-franchise, and then one an additional franchise as well. So we've always been franchisee, franchisor hat. After the exit, I spent some time at a franchise ad agency, understanding the supplier side and getting my hands dirty with different types of brands, and it's fun to build that and understand the communication and the tactics and really the grease and oil behind what is making these ads go, making these conversions turn. And then after that, I decided, my true passion is being on the franchisor side. And so since then, I have been a consultant, or I guess the term now is fractional CMO, been involved with about 20 plus brands in the last 2 years, thousands of franchisees. And right now my business partner, David Barr, and I are involved in a company called Catalyst, where that's essentially what we do with operations and marketing, hopefully setting them up to scale, not only, responsibly, but for the future. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about what franchising is or what it should be. And so we're hoping to help these brands either rebuild their foundation if that's what they need, or build it right from the start.
Now, I looked at your business partner's credentials as well. Very quite impressive as well. Very amazing, what involved what he's been in as well. So obviously,
I think he sits on 30 plus boards right now. I don't know, something
30.
like that.
Wow.
Yeah, something like that.
Amazing. But I just want to just pick your brains with the marketing, because I think it'd be really, really helpful based on this presentation. I'm going to put a link to it for people who haven't seen it. But
Sure.
One of the things about obviously organic search, obviously that's declining. Your data was saying 30 to 60% decline already. So obviously that's something you're probably hearing from all different businesses, and they're like,
Yeah.
sort of, well, how do we fix this, or what do we do? So when you get that sort of question, what do you tell brands or franchisors around it?
Yeah, so that was the interesting, or I should say the fun part about Catalyst is we're involved in so many different industries. So from automotive to quick service to health and wellness, home services. So we really touch it all. And what I was noting was, one of the biggest things obviously is a website. And I've got some pretty incredible website suppliers. We've got some that do it in-house. And I started to realize like, oh, there is a very large percentage of, and specifically forms too, because those are primarily the ones that we count. The form leads are just consistently going down and the traffic is going down. But how can this be when our SEO is pretty dialed in, right? We've got everything else is working in our favor. There's got to be something else going on, or I'm really bad at my job. Like this doesn't make sense. So when I started doing a deeper research, it really clicked when I realized, there's this thing that we call zero click behavior. And since the influx of AI, specifically ChatGPT or now Gemini, and I'm sure Claude, people are no longer utilizing websites to research. They don't even want to go to the website. They just want the answer engine to tell them. And then they might go to the website to convert, or many times they're converting off of the Google business profile, calling, or things of that nature. So not only have we seen organic traffic just dropping across the board, like you said, it's about in some cases up to 40% year over year. It's consistently dropping across all industries and multiple years. And then on that, we're also seeing an aggressive influx of phone calls straying away from forms, which also makes sense. And so in doing this and then understanding, well, Google has a monopoly, and if they're already losing a 25+% of traffic off their platform to ChatGPT or Claude, that's going to have them take a financial hit. And of course, if people are not clicking around on links anymore, then of course they're going to increase, Google cost per leads, and, they kind of control the levers there. So it started to really click when we realized it's no longer about winning the keyword or being top of page, but it's really about how do you stop the bleed, right? Doing just enough in the website world and the conversion world and the SEO so that you're not down 60 or 70%, right? We know it's going to be down, but just how do we stop the bleed? And then on that point, how do we now become more embedded into the AI ecosystem? Because that's certainly not going anywhere, and Google's not going to lose. As much as we might think ChatGPT and Claude or they might release ads, like the reality is Google's not going to lose. And even the features that Gemini puts out, week over week are just continuously getting more great, but also invasive. And so it's just something that we need to keep up with and understand that there are just some things that we have to work around. And there's never going to be a world where I can just stop the decline of organic traffic, no matter how good the website is, or if I show up first all the time. It's not what the consumers want.
Absolutely. And the term people will hear now is AEO and GEO. And there's a lot of agencies now pitching that to their franchisor clients, and a lot of franchisors go, we need to do this, but I think it's a bit of a Wild West at the moment in terms of it, because I don't think anyone really knows. People claim to know, we can track your AI visibility and stuff, but I don't think that's, and they throw these reports and franchisors go, we need to do this, and then all of a sudden they're off with a vendor and paying for all this stuff. So do you want to just explain to maybe franchisors and franchisees listening about GEO and AEO? So you've mentioned a great summary of how it actually happens before, but just want to talk about it from the franchisor perspective, because they're going to get pitched a lot from agencies around this specifically. And do you want to maybe just clear up a few maybe misconceptions around it?
Sure. So I ruffled a lot of feathers a few years ago when I started saying it was complete BS that agencies were selling SEO as packages to franchisees. The truth is there is nothing a franchisee can do to help their SEO but to get more reviews.
Yep.
Sure, maybe that could be automated. But if you're telling me you're selling me a SEO package for $4.99 a month and it's going to come with a couple blogs or keywords, like it's just BS. Like that is stuff that the home office should be handling because it's the URL, right? And I think the same thing is going to happen with AEO and GEO and people saying, oh, well, if you give me access to this, and maybe it's not the website anymore, maybe it's the Google business profile. There's going to be all of these sorts of companies that come out and say they can track it. And the biggest piece here is understanding that even if you're not involved with an agency that's saying they can do it, or if you're not doing it, you're behind, like your website and pages are being scraped and read by AI 24/7 right now. It's just going to be a long game about how often and how consistent can you show up in that answer. So now it's even more competitive because at least on Google, we were competing for the first page. Now we're competing for one, maybe two answers. So it is going to have to be something that somebody focuses. But if agencies are coming in and trying to sell you AEO and GEO flat out, I would call BS, because the only real way to do that well is from a foundational standpoint right now, right? It's your local listings are claimed and accurate, your GBP, you're doing hyper localized pages, you're getting a lot of reviews, you're responding to those reviews. And now I say that now and it's April 6th, but at any point, somebody could release AI ads and that could just change the game. So as of right now, it's, there is a formula you can look up, and it's on one of my slides, of exactly how you become the number one answer. And the number one answer, not just, hey, best window tinting company in the US. Nobody searches that. They says best window tint company near me, right? How do you show up locally in every single one of those? And it's going to be a consistent effort. That's not just something someone can tag on and it's, oh, our AEO is taken care of. It's just embedded so deep into all of the digital aspects. So I would say, don't get so nervous that you sign someone thinking that now it's been taken care of. Like, this is going to be so deeply rooted into every piece of your digital brand and your franchisees as well, that it's something that you build, it's long-term, and you have to monitor.
Absolutely. And I was going to say I think the stuff you mentioned, just having the good foundation, you still need to have good traditional, what we'll call it traditional, but I guess SEO, your website loads quick. You need to have a good backlink profile, press mentions, all these sorts of things, which has been part of SEO for a long, long time. It just means your business has got the potential now to be surfaced in multiple different areas, whereas before it was just generally be just Google and that was it, where now you can be surfaced in LLMs and conversations.
And I think it's, I think it's too, it's like, what you and I have known, and a lot of people in going through websites, tons, is that like the best websites are short, simple, to the point, condensed. They tell you what you need to know. They give you pricing, there's transparency, and then you can contact or send a lead in at any point. Well, AI, that's what they want now. So we already knew that was the best form of optimization and conversion just as marketers. But now AI is almost making it not an option. Like, if you have these lengthy texts and all these forms that don't work, like, it doesn't want it. It's not efficient. Like, you have to be the most efficient marketer as well and show up that way. Otherwise, you're just going to fall behind.
Absolutely. Actually, even the way you do blog content now, right? 3-4 years ago, it might be 2,500 words, and you have to have this, keywords mentioned this many times, right? Obviously now it's just short and sharp answers. And obviously, your marketing agencies, whoever you're dealing with, that should be top of their mind in regards to a lot more FAQ heavy stuff, short snippets that can be grabbed. But I think as well, I think what you mentioned earlier, which is really important, Rand Fishkin from SparkToro did a lot of good stuff with the zero-click marketing, what you mentioned before. And I think that's what franchisors and franchisees really need to understand, is that the search and the buyer journeys just changed completely. And it's really hard to attribute stuff. So do you want to talk about maybe the attribution gaps, or just what they should actually know, like from your perspective, like, how are customers and how are prospects actually researching businesses now?
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm working on this flow chart that's been bouncing around in my brain for a couple of days. And what's happening now is, I think, because there is less variables in how we get leads, like, people aren't going to accidentally stumble upon your website. Like, sure, there's a PPC play there, but for the most part, like, the answer engines are giving people answers, like, and then they're just going to that answer for the most part. And so it's less about, for me, differentiators. You hear that word all the time. What makes us different? What makes us different? Well, there's 97 million plumbing companies. I cannot tell you that they're that friggin' different in how they're fixing my toilet, right? And so what I'm trying to coach on is that no longer should we be looking at your target market as a whole or as a pond, but you really have to dig in deeper into the buyer's intent. And what I mean by that is, before we'd look at our target audience, right? And we'd say, yeah, some might not be ready, some are ready, but for the most part, this is what makes us great. Here's how we stand out. Let's do some creative around that. Well, that's not going to work anymore, right? Because you might not even get in front of those, right? And if you do, it's lots of money in marketing. And so what I mean by that now is, you really have to now start separating your target audience from, first of all, is your product or service a need or a want? And like let's be real clear about that. Like deck restoration, like probably a need if it's something like, oh, I got hit by lightning. If it's like, I want a new deck, that's a want. Maybe there's some gray area, but for the most part, like let's be real honest about this. And then from there, you have to understand of that market now, who is in the create, meaning you need to create the need for them or the want. Who's in the convincing stage? They know, they're not really sure if they want to spend money or spend money on you. And then the close section. Because right now people are just looking at all of the leads the same and looking at all of the conversion rates as roll-ups. But when you look at these kind of different intents within each sector, for instance, like a need-based product, at any point in time, buyers entering this stage of like where you would want to, let's say I do home cleaning. That's might be a want. Let's say it's a need, whatever. About 5 to 15% of buyers that they don't know that they need this, create that need. And then at any given time, there's about 20 to 30% that are entering the stage that know they need it, but they're not sure which one. And then there's about 50 to 70% of buyers that are like, I need it, I just don't know which one. Now, if you go on the other side and say, well, let's pretend made is a want. Well, now at the time that it was a need and there's about 5 to 15% that you're saying you need to create that need. Well, on the want side, it's actually 25 to 45%. And then, so it just gets really complex from there. And you have to understand, like, where are you going to be moving your budget around based on your target market, based on their stage? Because based on their stage is going to be what they're Googling or searching differently, and making sure that you're showing up for those answers at that time of answer and ask is going to be super crucial. So essentially, to me, my friends and family think I just sit in front of a computer and make commercials all day because I'm in marketing. But in reality, like, this is becoming more and more of a math formula. And the people that can exercise this formula and fine tune it kind of like a muscle are going to be the brands that win.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it's getting a lot more complicated now. And like personally, how do you then keep up with everything that's happening? Like, are you using much AI in your role to sort of help you with a lot of this analysis, or how do you sort of doing, or just making purely objective, guesstimates, I guess, based on the numbers you're seeing, or how do you keep up with it all?
So one of the benefits of working with myself and Catalyst is because we have access to we've seen so many different brands, we work with so many different brands across a lot of industries, we have a lot of benchmarks that we can very comfortably say, like, this is what you should be seeing, or this is what you should be doing. I am not a early adopter by any means, and my dad grew up as a VP of Apple, so he probably hates me for saying that. But I am not someone who's like, oh, my ChatGPT knows my personality. Like, I don't get it yet, because for me, especially in consulting, like, my brain is the product and service. So if I'm trying to train, like, I don't know, like, let's just keep it in my brain. However, what it does help me with is I will go ahead and ask, Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT. I'll ask them all the same thing of, like, is there anything new that we need to know in AI trends? What about organic search? And it'll be honest with itself, which is nice. Outside of that, what I usually do if I'm looking at a brand as a whole, I'll take all of their KPIs and throw it into, a private model and say, give me the biggest gaps here. And it might be, this lead to estimate conversion ratio is 12% under what your other brands were, right? So that's something we know we need to hone in on first. So it really helps us see the bigger gaps and consolidating a lot of information into one, which has been super helpful for me.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something before. I think people, I sort of think you'd be platform agnostic, but I think you mentioned Google. Even though Google Gemini, I think, is probably used the less over Claude and ChatGPT. I just know from our franchisees here, everyone's ChatGPT first, because I think they've got the brand around it. Then you got Claude maybe, and then Gemini. But I think you're right. Like, Google's just got too much money involved. They've got too much data. That Gemini, I think, as a chat product anyway, will maybe sort of slowly make a comeback. But the thing with that I've noticed, which has been good for us, which is indirectly, is how much it's using YouTube. It's actually using YouTube as a source. And a lot of the videos, we've got around more than 3,500 videos on the YouTube channel, and how that's being used by AI overviews and obviously AI mode, how much they're using YouTube, which I think is quite interesting compared to the other platforms which don't
Yeah.
really use it as much. But where do you see that product in Google Gemini developing and going? Because I agree with you. I think they're just too big to not win out, and I think they've got the money and they're not, their cash is available to actually outlast probably ChatGPT, who's burning through like billions of dollars every week. So, but I think everyone's focusing on ChatGPT and Claude. No one's really using Gemini or focusing on Gemini at all. So, what are your sort of thoughts around that?
I think that Gemini will come out with they might already have it. If they don't, then they'll find a better way to market it because I don't know about it. But a platform similar to Claude or ChatGPT. But the thing about Google is because they're already intertwined, plugged into every aspect of your life, into your phone. Think about the two-step authentication that, like, yes, it's me and it works immediately. I was like, is that magic? Every time the two-step works, I'm like, is it magic? What's going to happen is that because they have such integrations into your life already, I've already found it on my phone. It becomes more of a nuisance if I'm in Google to then navigate away to ChatGPT. Half the time I'm not logged in. That eventually I think people will start going to their Gemini module or whatever it'll be. And then it's just going to start integrating seamlessly. It already is with like adding it to your calendar via a picture and things of that nature. So I think that's where it's going. I think that there will be a huge break in terms of, eventually the people won't pay or can't pay the extreme cost per leads, and people will move away from Google PPC because prices are getting so expensive and they're not getting new customers necessarily from them. But I think the interesting piece is that there will be a time where a lot of independents, I think, will just not understand where their customers are coming from. They used to come from PPC, but it's not organic. And realistically, it's probably going to be the GBP and things of that nature that they're not used to tracking. But then what's going to happen is Gemini is going to integrate some sort of new version of PPC. That is, how do you buy your way into the AI ad spot? And then that will just, change the game. I don't know how they're going to do that, but I foresee that.
Yeah,
big mind maker for them.
I think that has to happen. Because the big problem for us is, we used to, because we're home services, for us, you could just throw extra money at an area and reliably you're going to get an extra bunch of customers for a franchisee 4 years ago. And now you can't, it's not the same at all, which is why we're really heavy on allowing our franchisees to use social media, because we do find they can generate some good lead gen from social. But in your report, you mentioned something about changing vendors, which I want to raise with you as well, agency selection. I think it's a big problem here where you've got franchisors, they don't want to almost, they're really vendor loyal for whatever reason, a lot of our guys here. Whereas they're really vendor loyal. And I think it's almost like they don't want to change because, they might feel bad, or it might look bad on them or something like that. So how do you audit those vendors that's kept up? How can they actually make a real decision around? Because I think a lot of our guys are stuck with their vendors for a long time, or their agencies, especially now with what's happening. And you can see there's a lot of confusion, but there's also, marketing agencies, for them to try and find is very hard, a good one. So what would you sort of say from your experience around that?
I will never bring a non-franchise experienced agency, or really any vendor that hasn't dealt in franchising. I don't care if it's multi-location. Like, corporate multi-location is much different than franchising.
Yeah.
I just won't work with them. And they could be the best one on earth, but if they don't understand franchising, like, it's going to be a huge setback. I always say that there is no harm in doing an RFP process. You should do one every 2 years. If you're not outgrowing your suppliers, or at least making them win back your business, then you're probably stalled, right? There's just, everybody should be growing and evolving, and there is way too much data for you to understand if they are doing their jobs or not. Now, I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to US or UK or whatever vendors is that franchisors fail to give suppliers or vendors guardrails. Right? They might say, here's our target cost per lead. But then all of a sudden, let's say it's $60. If it's $100, then what? Is it too high? Is it not high enough? Like, so usually what I recommend is, hey, look at, let's say you're talking to a call center. The lowest we're going to accept as a conversion rate is, let's say, 60%. If you get any lower than that, for any of the locations at any given time, we're going to have a conversation about what's happening here. Now, there might be a reason. It could be the franchisee uploaded this spam list, right? Or it could be, hey, like, we got a new agent and they're working on that account and they're just not turning out, right? But if you don't do that, and you're just saying, oh, the standard is 65%. Well, franchisees are always going to come back and say that's bad. Where, the phone company's going to be like, that's great. What do you mean? Same thing on cost per lead. Hey, the lowest we're comfortable with is, let's say your target cost per lead $65. The lowest we're comfortable with is about $50. If you get lower than that, we're going to start questioning the quality and really honing in on the conversion rates. Now, if you can get lower than that and still keep the conversion rates from our end the same, good on you. But we're not expecting you to get the lowest at all times. Now, the highest we'll accept is 110. And that's for franchisees in ramp period or a certain issue. So giving them a range, that way we know, hey, if they're in our acceptable range, let's go look at other places. That way it's not just kind of like, if someone gives me a ticket and says be there at 9:30, well, do I have to be there at 9:30 or is it I'm allowed to enter at 9:30? So giving them a more clear understanding of what's good and what's bad, and also understanding, yeah, people are very loyal to their vendors, but you have to think of it as these franchisees, if you're a franchisor, these franchisees are your children. You owe it to them to provide the best. You do not owe the business to any of these suppliers. Like, they have chosen to be on that side of the business. And you don't have to change if they are delivering. And I don't care if it's posters, ads, whatever, there is plenty of data that can tell you if things are working, if there's adoption, or if there's not.
Absolutely. No, really great advice. And you also mentioned a lot about local enablement and from a franchisee level here. So franchisees now, like, it's obviously back once again for us, 5-6 years ago, franchisees would do their traditional local area marketing, whereas now we're really heavy, like most businesses, on Google business profiles, especially in home services, and we really, really hammer that point home. But from a franchisee sort of level, how do you sort of improve, or how do you explain this sort of stuff to franchisees as well? Because I actually did a comments recently and I presented about AEO, GEO and stuff, and you're watching people's minds, they just don't want to be involved with it, or maybe Google business profiles is as far as they're going to go. But how do you sort of get this sort of across to groups in particular, and then obviously plans for them at a franchisee level to sort of help, I guess, in this sort of area?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more of a hard ass, but I think I'm allowed to be that because I'm also a franchisee and I also eat my own words at times. So for instance, back post-COVID days, there's a thing called message market match, right? And the market had to be digital. We 6 feet apart, that's just what it was. And the consumers adapted and, our leads were through the roof and it was great. Well, 5 years later, the market is not digital. That's just not what consumers want. They want in person, they want reviews, they want trust. The problem is that franchisees got real used to spending and not having to go do, and they're having a real hard time adjusting to that. Where consumer behaviors can switch on a dime. Think of, in the US, TSA was shut down. People just got real used to, got to leave for the airport 7 hours early, because that's what I have to do. Whereas businesses, they don't shift as fast as consumer behavior. So on that, we can still tell them, look, do you want to do business with someone you've never met and you want a new deck and it's going to be $8,000? Or do you want to do $8,000 with someone that you met and their kids go to school with you? That sort of piece. But that doesn't make it any easier. It doesn't make it any more appealing. I'm a people person and I don't want to go do that. One of my greatest mentors is the head of BNI, and I don't go to as many BNI meetings as I should. Right. And the reality is that as business owners and franchise owners, you have to do everything plus have a life. And so it's important to also remember to meet your franchisees where they are. I'm going to give you the simplest, most effective local pieces that you need to do. I can't drag you out to do them, but I also can't sit here and say, do them, and if you don't, that's your fault. Or if you don't do them, then go spend these thousands of dollars in ads. There has to be an in-between. And there are starting to be companies out there that provide a good in-between. There's this company is called Glass House. It's digital door knocking, right? And there's other ways where a franchisee can be involved locally and yet it's still digital. So, it's our job as a franchisor to be innovative, test out these new solutions, but still remembering, yes, local is important, but to a point, because at the same time, if none of my franchisees are going to do what I'm telling them to do, then I have to shift.
Yeah.
Regardless if it's good or bad for them, I have to find a better solution. So, you definitely want to have options.
And you mentioned the word then trust, and I think this is a big one we're seeing now. A lot of people saying you got to optimize for trust, right? And obviously, what is trust? Is there more reviews online? Is it, as you said, is there something, seeing someone with the vehicle at the kids' school, or they're at events chatting to people? What is it? So how should local businesses, let's say, optimize for trust? Because I think it's a word now in marketing that is getting thrown around a lot. You're optimizing for trust, or you need to, how do we optimize for that? So do you want, from your perspective as a franchisee and in your experience, like best way to optimize for trust from a franchisee level, or for all franchisors, what can they do?
I think that optimizing for trust does not necessarily mean optimizing for the lowest cost per acquisition, but for the longest lifetime value.
Right.
And so what I mean by that is that building these local community pieces take time, right? And, for franchisees, you can tell them, hey, put up a billboard, and they will ask you till the cows come home, well, how many customers did I get from that billboard? And you're like, that's not the point. That's not the point. And so it's similar to things like that of like, you need to be involved, but also, so BNI CEO, my mentor, Mary Thompson, always says givers gain. You need to go out with the intention not to get, but to give. And whether you're giving your community, even if it's window washing and you're doing yard signs, like your intention is, I want to help clean up this community. And so I'm going to do 20 of these, and I'm going to do some flyers, and, maybe I'm working with local businesses, but you have to have the mindset of, this is not a quick turnaround. This isn't, I'm going to do this and get 20 new customers and then life is easy. It is a long game and a long play. Now, if you want a lot of customers real quick, great. We can give you those. There's a strategy for that, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. We're looking to build those local roots that those people not only come, but they come back. And even if it's like a house purchase where you're like, they're not coming back for 15 years, you want their referrals and you want their network. So I often say, think of a triangle where it's quality on one point and cost efficiency on another and speed on the third one. We'll pick two, because you don't get all three. You don't get the best customer and they close really fast and it's super cheap. It just doesn't exist, right? So understand, what are your primary goals and leaning into those, and especially with local, knowing that your goal here is to build a name in the community. Your name shouldn't be, oh, Joe Schmo just wants my business. He doesn't really care. Your goal should be, oh, he's the best X, or she's the best X, in this area. And I think that's a mind shift thing we have to change with franchisees as well, because it's always get. I want it cheaper, 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 but I want people to pay more, more, more. And as costs rise and, people are uncertain in politics, the only thing is for certain is that people need people, and people need good people, and good people can have great businesses, and you can have the greatest business. And if you're trying to sell me and you just very clearly don't care about me, my family, like very clearly just trying to get the sale, you're just a dime a dozen. But if you're that guy that comes to my door and is like, oh, your dog's super cute, little things, impressions matter. And I think that that's hopefully what will continue shaping our local behavior, because I don't find the consumer behavior shifting anytime soon in terms of all of a sudden they want to go back completely digital. I think we've learned what we had to do in COVID, and I think people are not wanting to go back to that.
Absolutely. Well, we're in the most lockdown city in the world in Melbourne, and absolutely, the franchisees that I know who do really, really well, all the stuff you mentioned, the extra time with the customer asking, you're mentioning about the dog or this and that, all those little things you're mentioning, they're the ones, that's the difference between a really good franchisee and the ones that might be struggling or not doing as well as that they do that. But you said something at the start, which I think we all deal with is, all right, billboard, how many leads did I get rid of this? I deal with this all the time with franchisors. They don't understand, how do you go about then changing that mindset? Is it just a constant education piece? Are you doing regular meetings? Like, how do you go around shifting that mindset? Because I think that's I get this all the time, same sort of thing. I want to invest this much money in here. I want this many leads, that's going to equal that many sales. And they look at it really just exactly like that. They don't look at anything in between or no nuance. So how do you go about that statement? Because I think it's very common in the industry we work in.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot at franchise conferences, and I usually start by saying, look, if this is a sliding scale of 0 to 100, where you're either paying for all your leads or you're working for them, like locally, and ideally it's 50-50, Never going to be. Right now, it's like 90 to 80% digital, 10% local. But there's no world where you say you pay 50% and then don't do any of the local, or you do some of the local but none of the paid, because just because you're a franchise does not guarantee you free leads, especially now. Even with the best biggest companies, that organic traffic is dropping. Like, that's just not what this does. And people then say, oh, no, that's not true. I said, if that's not true, then how come McDonald's franchisees have to spend 5% of their revenue weekly back into marketing? McDonald's. So what makes you think, as an ex-franchisee, you don't have to pay for leads? Riddle me that. And then they're like, oh, I don't really get that. And so then I kind of go into explaining, like, yeah, 20 years ago, it was very clear. There was like one channel for marketing. It was direct mail, and it was, I can spend $2,000 and get clients for $200. And it was very simple. 10 years go by, it becomes a fork. Well, I can spend $2,000 and maybe there's 4 channels, but I can roughly attribute. Now it's an entire wheel, and all of the wheels play into one another, and it's very complicated, and franchisees never really listen to that, even though they know it. So oftentimes what I tell them is, first, for someone to give your business a yes, and that doesn't mean here's my money. It means, like, first, yes, clicking on the link or giving you a call, they need between 12 and 15 impressions. So they need to see your brand 12 to 15 times. And not all impressions are the same. If I see Jim's Group on your t-shirt, that might be worth 1 or 2. If you hand me a really nice business card, write your dog's name on it and be like, hey, look for him next time you're in the dog park, that might be worth 5 or 6, right? Somewhere in that needs to add to 15. Now, does the billboard happen to be someone's 15th impression every single time? No, but it certainly gets people's impressions up a lot quicker and a lot faster. So that's the first thing. And then I usually say, look, if you understand your cost per acquisition and your conversion rates, we can then go back to our lead generators and say, well, where are the top converting, what are the top converting ones? Usually it's Google PPC, right? And I say, look, until I've maxed out this, because this is essentially the bottom of the highest funnel, right? That's where people go when they're ready to make a decision. Until I have maxed out all of that demand, which, quite frankly, especially in home services, is usually not until like 8 to 10 grand a month, then I don't need to go elsewhere. Right? If you're getting consistent leads and then limited by budget, I'm not telling you to go do a billboard. Now, if you max out on Google PPC, then I'm saying, okay, now we need to generate more demand. Where do we go to generate? Meta. Maybe it's billboards, maybe it's mailers, but understanding that the entire actions are then to get them to Google to then convert on PPC. So trying to explain it a little bit funnel by funnel is helpful as well. And yes, it differs if you're a brand new brand in a brand new area. Maybe you need to make a splash, but for the most part, products and services are, they're not rocket science here. There's usually some that's done it before, and this is a playbook of how low or what is the average cost per lead that I'm going to get from these? Does it work within my margins? How do I get more of those?
And I think the franchisors and head offices need to be better communicating this to franchisees as well, and don't dumb it down. I think they don't share this sort of information. And what you're saying is explain it beautifully, right? I think most reasonable people would hear that and go, yep, that's right. So I think head offices and franchisors need to get a lot better at explaining what you just said to franchisees. That's just from my perspective anyway. Now,
I think they're scared to tell franchisees to spend more because that's what they've been saying for years.
Yeah.
But now it's, truthfully, you either have to spend more and do more. But I'm not going to tell, my philosophy is I'm never going to sit there and say spend more first. I can't tell you to spend money you don't have, and I can't force you to spend money you don't want to spend based on franchise agreement. So I have to give you different avenues to hit the same goal. And usually it doesn't always come from net new acquisitions. Usually it's, can we fix a little bit of these conversion rates? Can we up your ticket size? What does your win back ratio look like? What is your referral? And so all of a sudden, when you start getting these different cogs in the wheel pushing money in, the net new goes from, oh, I need 300 new clients this month to, well, actually, I really only need 210 because, I cut my attrition, my ticket rate is up. So things of that nature.
Absolutely. No, it's great advice. And I want to just talk a little bit now about franchise recruitment, because you guys do a lot different than what we do over here anyway. So you obviously do lead gen with Google Ads. You obviously have portals and things called brokers. We don't have brokers here at all. We've pretty much got franchisors, or head office will sell the franchise directly to the franchisee, and they've obviously, got to generate leads for themselves. So do you want to talk about, recruiting franchisees from your perspective, and how you guys do it over there, and maybe why you use brokers or lead gen portals? Because I'm a little bit opposite here. We have our franchisors, but we basically go video first. They create a heap of video assets, and then we amplify it. And then the video, we'll try and qualify people with podcasts and videos and all those sorts of things, and look after it that way. So why do you guys do it that way? It's probably more my question, and that from your perspective.
Get me in trouble on this podcast. So I'm going to be as politically correct as possible. I wish that the way that you guys are doing it in terms of direct to franchisor and them awarding was still the way that we did it.
Right.
While I appreciate the brokers and consultants and what they do. I think that for the most part, they're honest business people. However, like most things in the world, we have realized that there is a large gap between people not knowing about franchising and having a lot of options, and realizing franchisors got a lot of money, potential franchisees got a lot of money to spend. How do I get some of that? And so essentially what normally would have happened with Google PPC and people just saying, best automotive franchise to own, or tint franchise, or restaurant to own. Well, it's become quite competitive. I think there's something like 4,000 franchise brands in America right now, or globally. Yeah. And it's and everyone's bidding for it. And then you throw in these brokers, which essentially were to help franchisors get new candidates. And then now it's more framed of, well, we're helping the franchisees find the right brand for them. But it's also tough because they usually can only sell the brands that are within that network's portfolio, and that costs money. And so it can go either way. And so, I think just as it would be like buying a car, where there's a ton of resellers, there's a ton of dealerships, and there's some bad car salesmen, and then some really, really great ones. It's become kind of like that, the wild, wild west. Now, I know that there are some legislation that is going through to hopefully clean it up a little bit. But the reason this came about was because of the lack of education and understanding around franchising to begin with.
Right.
And then the plethora of options you have. If you type in plumbing franchise, there's probably 20 off the cuff. Mosquito franchise, don't get me started. It is Mosquito Authority, Mosquito Nix, Mosquito Shield, Mosquito, like every name with mosquito be gone, it's a franchise. Right. So, hoping to help clarify that. And franchising is also very confusing. You get that FDD and it's a 300 or whatever page document, and you're like, so they definitely can help guide through the process. But the point I really want to get across is, I think people are getting, franchisors, especially early franchisors, are getting the misconception that franchising means two ways. They're getting it wrong. It's either a cheaper way to license their model. And so oftentimes I talk to brands that are considering franchising, and I say, look, if your goal is to just take your model and use other people's money to get it spread out and get a little bit of money back, do not become a franchise. Maybe a license if that's something that you're interested in, but do not become a franchise. You should become a franchise if your goal has now shifted from business ownership and maybe the product or service you have, to now using that to make other people's dreams come true. That is how you become a franchise. And then the second piece is, they think that you have to franchise develop, meaning get more units, your way to profitability. This big rumor that you need 100 units before you break even is untrue. I mean, it's untrue in the broader statement, right? Yes, if you look at models and the unit level economics, and you're investing in the right place, 100 is probably where, you really start to see that money churn. But people straight out thinking, well, I just need to get 100 of these and then I'll start making money. That's untrue. It's all about the unit level economics, and unit level economics does not care about how fast or how slow you bring units on board. They care about how dialed in your marketing and your margins are. And that's where I wish people would focus more and less on net new.
And in the US, is franchising, as you mentioned, there's a lot of confusion around it, but is it seen as a viable business model, or is it something, because in Australia, there's a lot of low trust around franchising. The media in Australia really picks on franchising because it's like a David and Goliath, sort of the big, nasty national franchise brand and the poor franchisee who struggled. Do you get a lot of that in the US, or is it more? Because I think, me personally, from the outside looking, I think US buyers are a bit more, way more entrepreneurial, and a bit more, I can do this, than Australians, which are more, there's a thing called tall poppy syndrome, a lot more skepticism, all that sort of stuff. So do you think that's sort of in America, like, how does it sort of look from your perspective?
It is the unsung hero, I think, of our economy. I think right now, the newest report that the International Franchise Association put out said something like 830,000, there's 830,000 franchise establishments in the US. Which support almost 9 million jobs, which is equivalent to about 550 billion in contribution to the US GDP. So, and only 25% of those are fast food. So it's quite significant. I just think people still assume franchising is fast food, and that's not true. And to the broker's point, there's a lot more of them than there have been, and they're helping to get the word out. And obviously brands are coming on, but there's an interesting stat, and I think it's something like for every 100 brands that join franchising, 100 fail.
Right.
So it is very difficult to get the momentum and do it right. And so I don't know how long it's going to take for people to realize business ownership and franchising go hand in hand, but I think we're well on our way.
Yeah, I think you guys are a lot more entrepreneurial, business minded than here. Here's very tall poppy. I think New Zealand's the most per capita, and Australia's number 2 in terms of franchise brands. There's a lot, but our media here really, if there's a dispute with a franchisee and a franchisor, a lot of the time they run to the media, and then the media will run a big story on it, and it's really, really, really bad. And back in 2019, we had a lot of this sort of stuff happening, which is why we went with our video first approach to sort of build trust online with all the long form content that can actually build the trust. Because I think you guys have got a way better situation, I guess, which more business minded, or more, I can do it sort of focused than over here, which is a lot more skepticism. And unfortunately, we always hear, why pay Jim the money? Why not just do it yourself? It's far easier. You don't have to pay franchise fees and that. There's a lot of, but in saying that, we have a lot of people actually own businesses before, come and be franchisees, going, I don't want to deal with all the headaches of starting up a new business again. So it seems to be people who've never run a business before, over here anyway, have a really low trust, or just think business is easy, compared to those obviously no different.
Yeah, I think franchising as a whole does a very good job of explaining the pros and cons of business ownership, on your own or in a franchise. The easiest way that I usually explain it is it's just an expedited path to profitability if you follow the model. They're guaranteeing your metrics are out there, assuming a good franchisor. Because there are some bad ones. Do your research.
Yes, there are.
Yeah. But if I work 100% of my ability in an independent, I might reach break even in 6 years. If I do that in a franchise, it might be 3 years, right? So and then there's a community around it. So we do a good job of explaining that. And then outside of that, I would say, you get just as much skepticism, and you get the understanding of, why would I pay this franchise? You usually start to hear it after they've already bought the franchise and they're successful, and they're like, why am I paying you this fee? And you're like,
yeah.
Hold on.
Retention is probably a good point you alluded to there. We have that over here as well. Yeah.
But we really try to teach that you're not buying a franchise, you're being awarded a franchise. Like, this is a marriage. This is oftentimes a 10-year agreement. It's funny, I joke with my husband that it's harder to get out of our franchise agreements than our marriage. And so this really should be something that's vetted out through, weeks, if not months. And there's a lot of conversations and in person and in content and education that needs to go around it. And I think with our franchise development process, like, the quickest it can be is usually 6 weeks, and that's pushing it. I think 3 months is an appropriate time for someone to to come in, understand the model, and make a huge life decision. So, if we're staying between that cushion, I think that's a pretty good idea. But you also want to understand that you need to put the right people in your system. They could be the best. Maddie Zook could come in and say, I've owned 5 franchises. I know what I'm doing. If I am not the right culture fit or not the right personality fit, like, I won't be successful. And so just because money is green doesn't mean it's going to be green in your franchise, right? You need to understand, like, where do those fit? Are they going to work for your model and in your area and all of those things? So
Yep.
we do take a pretty deep dive into it, but yeah, there's a huge focus on franchise development that I wish would be a little bit more focused on the unit level economics.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely. But I do think America's ahead of Australia in a lot of ways with that, because a lot on websites, for example, Rolling Suds, for example, is one I looked at, or Augusta Lawn Care, and really good transparency around what people are actually earning. Whereas in Australia, there was no way they would actually ever do that on a website, right? So
yeah, there's a lot of legalities around that. As long as you have an item 19 and there's things you can say and can't say, it gets pretty.
But I think it's a great approach. I think transparency in franchising for us anyway is key. And we talk about fees openly all the time. But I was going to say as well, last question before I let you go, IFA, I heard AI was mentioned all the time at the IFA from people who come back from Australia. Now, you mentioned things, I see a lot of software starting up now, with AI solutions for this, for that, etc. Like in terms of, I sort of think a lot of franchise brands are looking, AI is going to solve all of our selection and recruitment problem. They're going to do this, and it's going to do this crazy nurture and be able to do this and that. Where do you see the reality of what's going to happen with it, maybe compared to the hype around it? Because there's a lot of hype around it. It's the buzzword. Everyone's throwing it around.
You mean AI in franchise development, you mean?
In franchise development, just in franchising in general. Because what do you see is, where's the actual use going to be, obviously, at both sort of levels?
Yeah, we had a pretty long discussion about this with a couple franchise execs, and I think that there's a couple fold here. I think that it's going to make your B players potentially A players, and I don't mean that in a culture way. I mean that like task-driven way. It will get rid of your D and C players, I think. So, people, just as people were consolidating their offices after COVID because people are working from home, it's going to gradually start doing that. People don't need a copywriter anymore. They don't need things. Yep. And it's as harsh as that sounds, it's just the truth, right? I also think that there will be something to be said for maybe helping with overhead in different models, such as like, maybe someone doesn't need 2 receptionists. Maybe they need an AI receptionist and a real receptionist, Now it's maybe they don't need to spend a ton of money on all of these email nurtures, CRM softwares, and an AI does it automatically. But regardless, I think that it's, as we spoke about earlier, it's about being as efficient as possible. But with AI, it's cutthroat. AI can do this and it can do it fast. There is no question about that, right? So it's just cutthroat about how efficient you have to be. And if you're not doing that, your competitor is, right? And if your competitor's doing it, the consumer likes it. And something I was told by Abby Fogel at Unleashed Brands, we were on a panel once, and she said something that really stopped me in my tracks, which is hard to do because I talk a lot and I don't listen great. But it was like, consumers are not comparing you to your competitor all the time. They're oftentimes comparing you to the last thing they purchased. And that's oftentimes on Amazon. And you can just imagine how efficient Amazon is, right? And so I think that AI is going to cut a lot of the fat, more fat than we're probably comfortable cutting because we're humans. But in terms of, is some software company going to come in and drop this big thing? I don't think so. I think that 5 to 10 years, websites will be obsolete. And, Google business profiles will probably be the number one piece, and SEO will no longer be a term, and it all will be AEO and GEO. And just like an SEO report is subjective and you could pull it 2 minutes apart, 30 seconds apart, and it'd be different at different areas. I think AI generative reports are going to be like that. So it's going to be like trying to hit a moving target, and there will be companies that try to capitalize on that. And I think that where we're going to see the biggest integration is just in, hopefully, overhead in people. I don't think that it's going to replace departments or really make all of that big a change, because the reason why this is happening is consumers want it, right? We want flying cars. I don't know why that hasn't happened, but we want quick, we want efficient, we want tech. That's why these are developing and why they're being adopted, right? If people didn't want it, they wouldn't be adopting it. And so I think it's just going to force everyone to move very quickly. And after that, I think it's, if you're not looking at data past, present, future, then you're going to be lost, because as quick as things are moving, like there is still a speedometer, right? There's still how much gas you have left in the tank. You need to have a home base, and that data is where it's going to be.
And I think people need to invest time in actually learning this stuff. I think people got their head in the sand a lot with it as well, and they think, they just can outsource it or get someone maybe involved in the company. But I think they have to start looking at this stuff and just playing around and trying these things. And the best use case I've had is a guy called Jimmy Farquhar. He's on his advisor committee, but he founded a franchise called Footy Nippers, which do like rugby coaching clinics, in person. And he used to be a software developer, but he actually vibe coded the franchise, we'll call it, with using Replit. And he said that this thing, he made the franchisee dashboard, the website, all the back end stuff with Replit and deployed it, and it actually works and used by franchisees. He was saying that would have cost him $400,000, maybe 6-7 years ago doing it. Now he's been able to do it on a 90-month subscription. So I think businesses now being able to actually, all these problems they've got internally and trying to get, software solutions done, et cetera. Now, if you've got a couple of cluey people in your organization, they can get to a working prototype specific for your business and make it more efficient that way, which you just couldn't do in the past. And it'd be a very expensive exercise. But now there's tools available where we've even got franchisees on our own end who are making their own custom little dashboards for the mowing weather or whatever it is, just vibe coding things, which I think is quite amazing.
Yeah, it's really fun. I think for franchisors, you still want to own the narrative, own the data and what people should be looking at, because there's so much data that people will get confused about or this or that. So, and obviously you've got your privacy and protection. So it's still good to own that authority, but you're completely right. Like the enablement of AI has just opened up the floodgates for what can be for a lot of franchisors and brands. And it's an exciting time. And I think exactly to your point, this is not a singular tool. This is not a singular platform like a TikTok or, Amazon Echo voice search. Like this is changing the DNA of business and the world as we know it. And if you're not prepared to face that, then find somebody else who is.
Absolutely. And I think marketers, are obviously a lot of fear around AI and stuff now, but I think as a marketing now, it's, you can do so much more with less, and you don't have to wait for, I'll give you an example. Like I use Claude Code a bit, and I've got a skill in there which can generate really good meta ads, like, using Nano Banana and stuff, and it can do research and all that sort of thing in the background. And within 20 minutes, you've got, 9 different creatives with ad copy, which is pretty good. And, whereas in the past I'd have to wait and get a graphic person or whatever to do it. So I think as marketers now, there's a lot of fear around AI, but I think, if you do embrace it, there's a lot more you can do than previously thought, and it's going to make you even more valuable, I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think, we have to keep the mindset of it's going to move fast. We don't know everything, and we have to be transparent about what we don't know, what we're monitoring, and what you do know, act on it. Don't wait. Right?
Absolutely.
There's things you can do today for free that can start getting your business and your digital brand ready for the future.
Absolutely. Well, Maddie, thank you very much for joining me today. I know it's late over there as well. Lots of really good insights. We probably share some similar challenges as well, but it's good to hear some different perspectives as well with what you guys do with recruitment and just some other of your insights as well, because you guys do it at a way different level to here. Like the delegation from Australia that went over to the IFA, they said, Australia's obviously one of the most franchised per capita brands, but they said everything in the States is just next level, and they're talking to franchisors with, thousands of locations or hundreds of locations, and just the scale of it is just a lot more than over here. So it's and I do appreciate you putting out the decks as well. They're really, really valuable to me anyway. And I do recommend anyone listening to this, please check out Maddie on LinkedIn and look at those decks, because it's really top level information that you've made available for free. So we appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff. So happy to do it anytime.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Thank you.